It seems that this episode is the episode of systems that need an overhaul. The police institution is one, the exam system is another. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Occasionally Insightful. I'm your host, Elisa, and today is an exciting day for the world. Exciting and also perhaps a little bit depressing. So as I'm recording this, it is the 21st of April here where I am. But what that means is that I guess on the 20th of April, US time zones, Derek Chauvin, former Minneapolis police officer, was found guilty of all three charges. Derek Chauvin, if you don't know, and if you don't know, have you been living under a rock this last year? But Derek Chauvin, if you don't know, was the police officer who murdered George Floyd. And that murder is really well, I'm sure the Black Lives Matter movement was, it's always been there. But kind of, I suppose it was the catalyst that got a lot of people motivated, and that's when we saw all of the protests happening across the US and indeed across the whole world. But yeah, Derek Chauvin, if you haven't been on the news, he was found guilty of all three charges: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. And this is a white cop getting prosecuted for the murder of a black man, which is an incredibly rare thing in the US system. So, it's good to see. It's good to see that the conviction came. But it is a little bit bittersweet, because if you look at the facts, and there are plenty of news articles and posts on Twitter and on various sites online that you can read more about this. And I encourage you to read more about this. But something like, I think 7 police officers have been convicted of murder associated with police shootings since 2005. Like 7 police officers since 2005, and there have undoubtedly been thousands of people who were needlessly killed because of a trigger-happy cop. And so many of those police officers walk away completely scot-free, no consequences. They get to keep their jobs as police officers and hurt who knows how many more people. Like, the institution itself is still broken. And just because Chauvin was convicted, doesn't mean that the system has turned over a new leaf. It's a step in the right direction, but it is a baby step, because the police institution in the US is so broken and so rotten on the inside. Like, it is fundamentally a system built on a history of oppression and racism, and the biasness embedded within the whole institution is problematic, and it's something that needs a drastic overhaul. So, on the one hand, great, Chauvin was convicted. But on the other hand, this is like a drop of justice within a sea, within an ocean, within a Pacific Ocean of injustice, so you win a battle, but the war still drags on. So, keep fighting. Black lives still matter. Black lives will always matter. Keep supporting and keep educating yourself and the people around you about this issue. And although I don't live in the US, racism is not a US specific issue, and it's not only American Black lives that matter. Although historically the injustices and the racism that Black Americans have endured is very particular and very specific. And the interwovenness of, is interwovenness a word? But the interwovenness of racism against Blacks and the rest of American culture and American history, it's so... America is the way it is today partly because of how it has treated Black Americans, Black people, and other people of color. So it's a complicated history, and it's not something that will be solved simply by the conviction of one police officer, right? So, yeah, what I was trying to say is racism isn't a US specific issue, and we can all do more if we're not in the US. If you, like me, are not in the US, is what I'm trying to say. If you, like me, are not in the US, I encourage you to do your part and to understand race relations in your own country, and to think about what you can do to, I don't want to say bridge the gap, but to sort of understand and address any issues that exist because of race relations. And just having an awareness and being able to call out flaws and injustices in the system where you see them, I think that is already a huge step in the right direction. So keep educating yourselves, people. This show loves people who continue to better themselves and educate themselves about the world that they live in. That is what we love to see. And I was also thinking, I was reading a lot about this on Twitter, which if you don't follow me, you should, because sometimes I post interesting things, but it's at @pod_insightful on Twitter. What I was thinking about is, George Floyd is still dead, right? And can we really say that he got justice when he was murdered in cold blood in a terribly inhumane way? That officer knelt on his neck, and he pleaded, and he said that he couldn't breathe. I'm very sorry if this is dark. Please skip ahead a few minutes to hopefully light a conversation. But I just need to say, George Floyd was not, his death was not painless. And I feel that the amount of public pressure it took for Chauvin to get this conviction, because I think if George Floyd's death could have gone like any other police shooting in the US. Mass shootings are another topic that we could perhaps discuss in another pod, but in another episode of the pod. But I'm just looking at police shootings right now. George Floyd's death, his murder, could have, the story could have transpired like so many other police shootings in the US, which is a really sad thing to have to say. But I feel like one of the reasons why it didn't was because of the amount of public pressure being put on the Minneapolis police and police in general, with the protests and everyone speaking out. And you can talk about how genuine were those people, but with the protests and with the people posting on Twitter and Instagram and all the black squares and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, people were talking a lot about it. Everyone kind of knows his name. Everyone knows the name George Floyd and everyone knows the name Chauvin, right? If you don't know, okay, maybe you should be more plugged into world affairs. But it's kind of a shame that to get to this point, to get a conviction, took so much effort. It shouldn't need so much effort for a police officer who murdered in plain sight to be convicted of manslaughter, right? The system should be better at weeding out police officers that use unnecessary force and violence in their job. But unfortunately, the system encourages that use of violence, and here is where we end up. So, like I said, this is a victory, but it is like contributing one small grain of rice towards building a gigantic mountain. It's like the victory is like one grain of rice, perhaps a handful of rice. Let's be generous, perhaps a handful of rice in comparison to the size of Mount Everest. Like, that's the kind of mountain we're dealing with, trying to dismantle and totally overhaul the police institution that in the United States. It's like, we can recognize the achievement, but we also need to recognize how much more work there is yet to be done. And I would, implore you to not get complacent and to continue fighting the good fight, as it were. And like I said, if you are not from the US, you can still support the issue. You can still, Black Lives Matter everywhere, no matter where they are. And racism exists everywhere, no matter where you are. So do your part, learn, educate yourself, educate the people around you, and call out injustice in any shape or form, wherever you may see it. I'm sorry that was like I said, it's a bittersweet way to start the pod, but this happened literally, the first thing that I saw when I woke up this morning. So, I wanted to talk about it. Another thing that I saw when I woke up this morning, as I opened up my YouTube, as I tend to do, as I'm getting ready in the morning, Apple had their April event. I use a lot of Apple products in my day-to-day life. I am not like an Apple fan girl, as in like I don't have to have the latest piece of Apple tech every single time. I'm not queuing at the stores or waiting by my laptop to buy it the moment it drops. I'm not one of those people. But I do like to watch videos and keep abreast of latest developments. And, I haven't really I didn't watch the event. I didn't watch anyone's sort of breakdown of the event. I haven't watched much videos. I just know that the Apple event happened. And I think they released the iPad, because now I'm getting commercials of the new iPad Pro all over my YouTube whenever I load something up. So, that's exciting. So yeah, I don't intend to turn this pod into like a newsroom kind of thing, but I think it's interesting to have a little segment at the beginning of the episode to just talk about things that have happened lately. Speaking of things that have happened lately, I have recently discovered perhaps one of my favorite series ever on YouTube. Okay, I don't know about favorite series ever, but it is really wholesome and it is really a nice watch. And the premise is this. The premise is this guy who is a design and usability guru. He's been designing and testing gadgets for over 40 years. Oh no, for 40 years, I think. He comes in and he tests a few kitchen gadgets, and he then suggests what could be done to improve them. Which I know doesn't sound like the most riveting piece of content, but honestly, the guy I love him. His name is Dan, and he is the right combination of somewhat sassy and kind of wholesome and endearing. It just makes you want to watch all of the videos. And you can also tell that he really knows what he's talking about, and he's very perceptive. And he yeah, I just really like it. Also, the dad jokes, the dad jokes are prominent, and I kind of like them. They grew on me. They grew on me. So if you're looking for something new to watch, I would recommend. It's on Epicurious, and just look for Epicurious gadget testing, something like that, and I'm sure the videos will come up. But I do like the format of the show. He tests the gadget. It could be like avocado slicers, or vegetable peelers, or vegetable choppers, or egg yolk separators. It's a whole variety of things. Bottle openers. But it's cool to see the gadgets themselves, because some of them are really specific and really kind of weird and wacky. But it's also very interesting to see his perspective, because you can really tell that he has an understanding of design and the customer experience. And one of the things that I like about his series is that he does a bit of a mobility impairment test. So in addition to using the gadget as he normally would with his dominant hand, he also oils up his non-dominant hand to simulate someone who has mobility issues, right? Because when your non-dominant hand is slippery, you can't, it doesn't work as well. I mean, your non-dominant hand probably doesn't work as well anyway. But when it's slippery, then you have the added complexity. So it is really interesting to see. I mean, it's not a perfect test, because a couple of the things they don't consider is how do you wash this gadget? Because some of the gadgets are I think that would kind of get gross and disgusting pretty quick. And they also don't really talk about storage. But nevertheless, it's a good show, and I encourage you to watch it if you are looking for something a little bit wholesome and something a little bit new. But watching that show has, I don't know, I think part of the reason why I also like watching that show is I find it interesting when people sort of talk about making things more accessible. Because, I mean, as an able-bodied person, it's not really something that I have to think about, alhamdulillah. But just because I don't have to think about it doesn't mean that I shouldn't think about it. Because if the world is more accessible for everyone, regardless of how able-bodied you are, it's just more pleasant for everyone. Like the improvements that he would suggest for these devices just make the device more comfortable to use. Even though I don't have a mobility impairment, I could still see how his suggestions on changing the design and the modifications that he would put, I can see how that would make the device better to use for me as an able-bodied person. And therefore, if it's just nicer to use for me, then perhaps it's usable, not necessarily nicer to use, but just usable and helpful to someone who struggles with some sort of mobility issue in their day-to-day life. It also, this series also reminds me of a video that I watched a while ago, perhaps on the same channel. Perhaps on the same channel. And it was with this blind YouTuber. I think her name is Molly Burke. And she was reviewing the packaging of beauty products and beauty and hygiene products, I think it was. And the points that she was raising were very interesting. So for example, she was talking about shampoo and conditioner bottles, and how a lot of brands have like matching shampoo and conditioner. I'm sure you've seen it, especially if you're a woman. Maybe with guys, like guys often get like the 3-in-1 shampoo, conditioner, body wash kind of deal. Like it's one bottle, it does everything, it just cleans you, right? But for women, there's like the shampoo bottle and the separate conditioner, right? But they kind of go together. A lot of brands make a shampoo and conditioner, but they make the bottle almost exactly identical, like if not completely identical. So as someone who is blind, it's hard to tell simply by touch, especially in the shower, which bottle is which, right? And so even something as simple as how, I forgot what brand she was talking about, but I think it might have been Herbal Essences. Never mind. But this brand, they put slightly, they put like an S-shaped ridge, a very, very small S-shaped ridges on the shampoo bottle, and then very small circles on a small section of the conditioner bottle. And just that simple modification allows someone to just feel and touch. Okay, I know which one is the shampoo. I know which one is the conditioner. So that's what I'm saying. Like, accessibility doesn't have to be this huge, and this doesn't have to require a huge overhaul in how things are in the world. But I think if we just start thinking more carefully about how we design things and how people interact with the products that we design, I think the world would be a much better place for more people. And if more people can be included, then, you know, what's not to love? What's not to love? So, yeah, go check that. I would recommend that you go check that series out if you are wanting something new to watch on YouTube. And hopefully that can brighten up your day, your week. I don't know. I'm just out here trying to provide some content recommendation for you all. But anyway, on to the meat of this week's episode. I actually have something of a structure, but it's also, knowing myself, it's going to be a bit of a free-flowing word vomit type of situation. So today's episode, I wanted to talk about exams, which might be a strange topic because I imagine that quite a few of my listeners are past the age where they're really taking like standardized exams, but it's still interesting. I mean, in the sense that it's still an interesting topic to discuss, because I think exams are something that a lot of us have had to go through at some point in our lives, and therefore it's something that we all have opinions about. And the main reason why I've been thinking about exams as of late is because my brother is about to sit his year 10 exams. So quick background. I went to a British international school and subsequently a British university. So my experience was completely with the British system. So that means that I sat my GCSEs when I was in year 11. So that was when I was 16. And then the year after that, I sat my AS levels. And the year after that, I sat my A levels. AS levels and A levels, are basically part of the same qualification. But they kind of split the exams over 2 sessions. So it is possible, and some people do take. So let's say you're taking A-level economics and you have 4 papers to do. It is possible for you to sit all 4 papers at the end of year 13. And, that's just your A-levels. Or what my school did was you sit 2 of the papers at the end of year 12, and that's your AS levels. And then you sit the other 2 papers at the end of year 13. And then together, those 4 papers sat over those 2 sessions become your A-level grade. I don't know if that's what schools can still do. I know that a lot of schools in the UK, or there was a time where schools in the UK made everyone sit all of their exams at the end of year 13 at their A-levels. But I don't know. I don't know what's happened to the education system since I've left it, So yeah, I set my GCSEs when I was 16, and then subsequently exams at 17 and 18. I got pretty good grades all around. I got into Cambridge, and at Cambridge, I sat exams at the end of every year. So the way it worked for me is, some of my papers did have coursework that counted towards the final grade, but really most things came down to that final exam at the end of my first year, my second year, my third year. But only my third year grade is what gets put onto my degree. So I could have done terribly in first and second year, and they wouldn't have mattered, because what gets put on my degree is my third year result. So yeah, that's pretty much my experience with taking exams. So in addition to the formal exams that I've taken, I suppose I've also taken mock exams. I sat for mocks before my GCSEs, before my AS, and before my A-levels, and I sat for very shoddy versions of mocks before my exams in Cambridge too. I'm not for first and second year, definitely. For third year, it was a bit of a different story. So the year 10 exams that my brother is about to take, he is currently halfway through his GCSE course, his GCSE years, right? Because GCSE years are year 10 and year 11. So he's in year 10 now. He's about to say his year 10 exams. Theoretically, he's learned about half of the GCSE syllabus. So he's being tested on about half of the GCSE syllabus. So in effect, these are like a very, 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 very early mock. So and I would say that this is the first big exam, like the first proper exam that he's had to take. And I say this because I've been where he is before. Both of my siblings are going to the same school that I went to. So, their experiences are more or less similar to what I went through. So I can remember what I went through, and so therefore I can guess what he's going through. So yeah, I remember that my year 10 exams were the first big proper, exam that I had to sit. And, the first, I had kind of end of year exams in year 7, year 8, year 9, but those were exams that you did in your classroom. And it was it didn't feel so serious. But year 10 exams, at least in my school, you sit in the actual exam hall. It's set up like an exam hall, like it's individual desks. You have your exam paper. You have this exam schedule. It all feels a little bit more formal, a little bit more serious. And no, I wouldn't say intimidating, but you do feel like, oh, I'm sitting my exams. It doesn't feel so trivial. The year 10 exams don't count towards anything. They're not like the AS and A-level thing. With your GCSEs, you get tested on all of the content at the end of year 11. But this is a good sort of halfway point check. Are you on track? Do you know what you're supposed to know at this point in time? So in that sense, I suppose they're useful. But my real gripe with exams is many. And I'm no expert, and really all of my opinions are based on my own experience and based on my own thoughts. Like I said, I can only speak from what I have experienced going through the British style of education, like the British curriculum and the British system. So I'm sure it's much different in the US and in other parts of the world, but I think in general, exams are, I feel like as a student, you make them out to be so much more than they really are. Like when you're a student, it feels kind of like your life is consumed by exams, and everything that you do is helping you work towards that final grade. And once you've sort of gone through the stage of your life where you're required to sit through regular exams, you look back and you realize, exams really don't affect you that much later in life. I mean, yeah, you get some grades and you carry those grades around you for the rest of your life, which is a topic that we're going to get into. But you know, like, they're just exams. And the sort of the enormity of taking an exam sort of feels silly and laughable almost once you get past it and you realize that there are way more important things to worry about in life. So I kind of find it sad that so much of student life in secondary school and later in university, or whatever form of higher education you choose to pursue, I find it kind of sad that a lot of it is just, you know, about learning knowledge. I mean, learning knowledge is one thing, but then sort of forcing yourself to retain this knowledge and retain these skills so that you can later regurgitate them in an exam setting. I find that quite, I don't know. I hate the fact that we are forced to go through that. I really do. I don't think it's the most helpful means of education, especially, you know, if we reduce education to making sure that, or no, if we reduce education or progression in education, or how, if we define education simply by the grades that people got in their exam, that is such a reductionist view of education. Do you know what I mean? And it's sad to see that some people do take that approach. You know, that they do take that perspective on life and on education, and it all comes down to, what did you get? What are your grades? What is on your certificate? Yeah. But I feel that the system as a whole, again, it seems that this episode is the episode of systems that need an overhaul. The police institution is one, the exam system is another. So I think yeah, there are so many jumping in points with this topic of exams. But I think if we ask the question, who does well on exams, like who can get the highest grades, a lot of factors play into it. And a lot of those factors, or at least a good proportion of those factors, are not purely about how many hours you can dedicate to studying and how good you are at retaining information. Because the question of who does well on exams might better be phrased as who can afford to do well on exams, right? Because in secondary school, certainly where I live, a lot of people get tuition or extra after school classes, or somehow they get extra help from somewhere. And, you know, they come from a background and a household where their family is able to pay for those extra classes. Indeed, a lot of people don't go to those classes willingly. I will admit that. A lot of people get forced to go to those classes by their parents who want to see their children get very, very high grades. But again, that is itself a problem, you know? I think tutoring is useful when somebody genuinely needs help. But if you're forcing your children to go, and when they clearly don't want and don't particularly need to go to extra lessons, I don't know. I find that incredibly problematic, because your school years and education shouldn't just be about exams and getting the highest grade in your exams. It's about going and doing other extracurricular activities, doing sports or going to acting classes or, doing community service, whatever else it might be that you are passionate about and you want to do. I think it's important to make time for those as well. And, I had friends in school who went to tuition, but they also played sports and were in leadership, student leadership positions in school. And it seemed like they did all the things. But then I start to worry, okay, are you getting enough sleep? What's your mental health like? Are you actually taking care of yourself? Like, I think it's damaging to put the pressure to perform on your children, especially when they're going through such a crucial developmental stage in their lives. Like those, when you're 15 to 18, those years, like they really do a lot of, the experiences that you have during those years really do shape who you are down the line, I feel like. So yeah, who does well on exams? Sorry, I'm trying to get myself back to the original train of thought I was going down, which is the question of who does well on exams. It's partly a question of who can afford to do well on exams. And it's not just an issue of who can like physically pay, but also, like, what is your living situation like? Which I suppose are interrelated questions. But, at university, I encountered a much more diverse range of people. And I knew of people who, had to maintain part-time jobs in order to be able to support their family, but also having to study for exams. I'm sure that there are people who have to deal with chronic illness or mental health issues and still have to somehow study for exams. I know of people who had to care for loved ones, especially, I'm sure, during these COVID times. I'm sure that there were lots of people who were not able to devote as much time studying as they would have liked because they had to spend time caring for family members who were affected in some way, shape, or form by COVID. There are probably a lot of people who have to deal with raising a child and having to sit for exams. So, there are a lot of situations, both in school and in university, where someone might not be able to devote as much time studying for their exams as they would like. And then, they get penalized for situations that are completely out of their control, because they don't get as high a degree as someone who had a stable family, good internet. That's another thing. Good internet, good resource, good access to resources to study with, a nice, comfortable environment to study in. They get privilege really comes into play, I think, when we talk about exams and exam performance. I mentioned internet earlier, and I don't know how I would have been able to do any of my studying if I didn't have access to the internet. I don't think that I would have gotten as high marks as I did in some of my papers if I didn't have access to the internet to supplement the things I had learned in school, right? And that's something that I take for granted because it's just a part of my life. But for a lot of people, it's not, right? And so how do... Yeah, that internet and access to internet is another very important but also huge question that perhaps now is not the right time to get into. But that's another thing, right? To consider that we shouldn't assume that all people, all students have access to the same conducive learning environment at home, because the reality is they don't. And that reality then translates itself into the privileged kids getting, generally speaking, higher grades than the less privileged and you know, the those who come from disadvantaged households. I don't have any stats off the top of my head to back up, but I'm sure you could find some reports that would say something along those lines. But on the topic of disadvantaged households, and specifically students from disadvantaged households applying to university, at least in the UK, and at least when I was applying to university, which was, 4 or 5 years ago now? Oh my God, really 4 or 5 years ago? At least at that time, I know that universities would take students' applications into context. So if you got B's on your in your exams, but you came from a school where the average is like a C, that would look really good, right? So they take your application into context, and you know, other things like, you know, do you have to care for people in your household? What kind of economic background your family comes from? All of those things. So there are, or there were, I'm sure there still are, mechanisms in place to ensure that those who come from disadvantaged households are not too discriminated against in the application process. I'm sure that discrimination still happens, but it's you know, there are attempts to level the playing field. So even though this person got B's, where the average grade requirement is like an A or an A star, their B is my equivalent to an A star. You know, you get what I'm saying? So there is a chance for people from disadvantaged households to get into very prestigious universities and very prestigious places of education. But I think that the amount of effort that they have to put in, and the amount of resource, you know, the amount of effort that they have to put in to get into some of, you know, the Cambridges and the Oxfords of the world, I would wager is a lot higher than someone who comes from a, for lack of a better word, privileged background. So that's one thing. Number two, probably the amount of resources that those from disadvantaged backgrounds have access to is a lot less. You know, so it's two things working against them. It's, you have to put in a lot more work, but you also have access to a lot fewer resources, which just makes the work that much harder, right? Now, I guess that's, for me, that's unfair. And this is coming from someone who, you know, like I said earlier, I went to Cambridge and I felt pretty supported throughout my application process. Like, I had teachers who would review my personal statement and give me interview practice. So I alhamdulillah had a lot of help when I was applying to university. But even then, I can acknowledge And I can be deeply dissatisfied. I'm not sure, deeply dissatisfied by how unequal and unfair the process of getting into higher education can be, right? Because why should it be easier for me and harder for someone else just based on what school we went to and what economic background our parents have? Like, neither of those things are really, really in our control, right? And I don't think that this other person should be penalized. And on the flip side of the coin, I don't think I should be sort of rewarded just based on those factors. I mean, it's not purely based on those factors. Obviously, it's based on the merit of you as an applicant. But the merit of you as an applicant comes from the context that you applied from, right? Like the context of your school and the context of your household and your family and the access to resources that you had to, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think that the system of getting into higher education sort of, and especially the sort of top tier schools for higher education, sort of reinforces this class divide, basically. And I, if you are, none of this, I hope, is rocket science to you. I hope that the things that I'm saying kind of make sense. But you may be wondering, what's in it? If you are someone who, like me, comes from a pretty privileged background, you might be thinking to yourself, what is the benefit to me of having more competition? Basically, right? Like, what is, like, if the higher education system becomes more equal and, or that the process of getting into higher education becomes more equal and more accessible and more people from different backgrounds can apply and actually genuinely have a sense of, have a chance of getting into these institutions, what's in it for me? And honestly, if you are thinking in that way, if you are thinking from a self-centered, selfish, what's in it for me kind of way, perhaps you need to reevaluate your priorities, because I don't think that individualistic perspective, that self-centered perspective, is going to get you very far in life. Hot take. But seriously, I if you have such an issue with increasing access to higher education for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, if that is such an issue that it boils your blood and keeps you up at night and enrages you, perhaps you need to reevaluate your priorities. And perhaps you need to think about how you may or may not be contributing to systems of oppression. That's just my opinion, though. But while we're on this topic of people from disadvantaged backgrounds getting into higher education, I think that getting into higher education is only part of the battle, because once you from a disadvantaged background have gotten your offer, if and you actually get into somewhere like Cambridge, then comes the issue of surviving in Cambridge, right? And chances are you will not be able to fully. I'm trying to be careful with how I say things, because this is not my personal experience. And if anybody has had to deal with these issues and wants to talk more about their personal experience, then feel free to email me occasionally, insightfulpodcast@gmail.com, and we can discuss something. But what I'm trying to say here is that once this person from a disadvantaged background gets into Cambridge, they're still from a disadvantaged background, and chances are they will not have fully escaped, quote unquote, the things that they had to deal with. They might still have a chronic illness that they're dealing with. They might still have a sick family member that they had to take care of. They might still have to work part-time or somehow send money home to their family to be able to support that family, because whilst they were a student, they were working part-time. There's I think that to assume that, to have the perspective that giving someone from a disadvantaged background an offer letter into somewhere like Cambridge, and assuming that that's like a golden ticket or a silver bullet that solves all their problems, I think that that's a really simplistic way of looking at the issue, because the issue is so much deeper than simply getting access to higher education. You also need to think about how these people, and in what ways the support that these people will need whilst in higher education might differ, right? They might require schedules to be more flexible because they need to work part-time. They might require more support, at least in the first year, because let's remember, in this example, hypothetical student of ours got B's, which was pretty impressive considering their background in a school where most students get C's and D's. But they are coming into a cohort where a lot of their peers got straight A stars, right? So although their B, or the B's on their A-level certificate is very impressive and a feat for where they've come from, there's still that sort of knowledge and skills gap that they need to overcome. So, I mean, the step up to university is already a challenge for lots of people. But the when you need to make up, quote unquote, make up for, and sort of catch up to your peers, it's all the more daunting, I can imagine. So, if you want to expect the same quality of work from all your students, you kind of need to put in, the higher education institution need to put in more systems of support to enable these less advantaged students to catch up to everyone else and maybe even thrive and exceed everyone's expectations, rise to the top of the class, like really excel to their full potential. And I think, from the conversations that I've had with people and from what I've observed, I think a lot of universities kind of stop at expanding access and getting more people from disadvantaged backgrounds to apply. And they don't really have in place the systems of support necessary to enable these students to thrive at university. Which is a shame, because it's like, it feels almost tokenistic and performative. It's like, yeah, we want to say, it feels like the universities are doing this so that they can say, in their shiny annual reports, like, oh, our applicants from disadvantaged households increased by 15%, and we gave out 10% more offers compared to 10% more offers to these students compared to last year. They want those stats, but are they actually thinking about what the experience of being someone from a disadvantaged household is like as they go through university? I'm not sure that they are. And, if you're not gonna, if you're only gonna change the very, very front end of this education journey, what's the point? What's the point? Like overhaul it all and, ensure that the systems of support exist all the way, or don't do it at all. I think this half-assed approach is kind of insulting, and it's just a shame to see that it's a shame to see that students with so much potential are not allowed to live up to that potential because their higher education institution is unwilling to compromise. Like, it just seems so petty and an issue that could be solved, not easily, but it could be solved with genuine, meaningful discussion and consideration. And yeah, you hate to see it. And I know that Malaysia itself has its own issues with the higher education system, but since my experience, like I said, is mostly British international school here and then overseas for university, I don't feel like I can speak as deeply about what Malaysia has to deal with. I also want to point out, since we're on this topic of access, and earlier I said that universities, at least in the UK, put your achievements into context, put your grade achievements into the context of your school. I'm not sure whether employers later down in life, I'm not sure whether employers do the same. I mean, some of them probably do, but the more competitive places of work, like the top graduate recruitment places, like your investment banks and your top consulting firms, I would imagine that they really just want the creme de la creme of applicants, right? And I suppose that that's not really to do with education. That's more to do with sort of the job industry as a whole. But I guess it takes us back to the original starting point of this ramble, which is about exams and exam grades, and how, that exam grade tells someone how you performed on a particular day in a particular subject at a particular point in time, right? I feel that it's a very stationary measure of someone's intellect. And it doesn't capture, that single letter doesn't capture someone's resilience or their character or their perseverance or their approach to problem solving or their ability to interact with people. I mean, obviously there are other stages of the job application or whatever university application process that reveal these qualities, right? But that's assuming you get to those other stages of the job application. So often, or more often than not, that first stage of job application, that first screening, is looking at your grades and looking at your CV and looking whether you're up to the mark. Or not up to the mark, what's the word? Up to par, up to the standard that they're seeking. And it's frustrating to see that grades come first. Like, really? Grades come first? Like should we really be using grades as the screening mechanism? I mean, it is a very easy way to screen out applicants, but easy does not make it the best. Easy does not mean that you will get the best fit for your company, right? And that's not even considering the fact that, a lot of very, very bright individuals are not given a chance at all because they weren't able to go to university, and they don't have the grades at all. So yeah, I understand why the system is the way it is. It's efficient, it's easy, it's the best way probably to screen hundreds of applicants and narrow it down to the top 20 or whatever. But also, I find it infuriating that we give exams and the exams grades that you get such a high priority. They have such weight. They have such weight. So I suppose, in that sense, going back to my very, very, my much earlier statement, exams don't really matter, grades don't really matter. I mean, yeah, they do. They do. But they matter up to a certain point, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure I have the wisdom, knowledge, experience to comment on how we can improve the job recruitment and hiring process. What can we use to screen applicants? What is a quick and efficient screen of applicants if we're not going to use grades? And I'm sure that initial screen doesn't purely use grades, but if you look at, a lot of employers list minimum grade requirements, right? So if they're going to list minimum grade requirements, that's clearly a screen already. I don't think I am in a position where I can comment on how the hiring process could be improved. But if the hiring process can't be improved, then maybe we can think about a better way for grades to be handed out, and how they can capture more of a person's character and make it a better representation of who this person is, and not just who this person is in the context of sitting an exam and regurgitating information. Some subjects and some courses do already start to take that into account by requiring you to do coursework or long independent pieces of writing, like a dissertation. But even, so there is some, I don't want to say progress, but some opportunity to explore on that front. But I think the whole issue, not the whole issue, but I think one of the core questions that need to be addressed in this issue is standardization. Everyone everyone sits the same exams, right? But or the same method of assessment. Let me say that way. Everyone taking the same course sits the same method of assessment. But I I think I don't agree with that. Like, we get everyone to sit the same method of assessment so that we have a fair comparison, so that we can have a fair test. Fine. But I think the problem lies in forcing everyone to sit the same method of assessment, because not everyone shows off their best talents, shows off their talents in the same way. Like, exams are going to suit some people more than other people. Coursework is going to suit some people more than other people. I was talking to someone a while ago when I was still at university, and she was saying that guys, at least in geography, the subject that I studied, guys tend to perform better because, and perform better in the sense of they get awarded higher marks because they are a little bit more willing to take risks in their exam paper, and they're a little bit more willing to say and defend viewpoints that are a little bit more extreme, and extreme translate into sort of insightfulness and originality, which gets rewarded very positively. And not all guys, obviously, and I'm sure that a lot of girls in my cohort were just as, if not more, insightful. But the trend is that certain people who are brave enough to take a little bit of a risk during their exams are the people who get rewarded. So, but whereas some people, they don't have that same creativeness, or they can't come up with those unique insights on the spot in an exam like that. I don't think I could. I mean, it depends on the question. But yeah, when you have 3 hours to write 3 exam papers, you only have an hour a paper, your brain cannot think of something creative and innovative to say. I mean, maybe you can, but it's not going to be so extreme and so unique and so original. And it's just like, take that time pressure away, and I could take that time pressure away, and I will produce something really, really phenomenal. And I know this because this happened in my final year exams. So my final year exams were done digitally over a 24-hour period because of COVID. And so they recommended that you spend about an hour and a half writing each essay, but you could take more time to plan if you needed to. And so the exams were done over a 24-hour window, which means that, say 12 p.m. UK time, the exam paper gets released, and then 11:59 a.m. the next day, it's due, basically. You essentially, I mean, there is still like some time constraint, like you have 24 hours, but you don't need 24 hours to write 2 papers, to write 2 essays. So because the time constraints were removed, and because I actually had time to breathe and allow my brain to think, and I wasn't like immediately seized up with exams, I didn't have that initial panic. I could sit and I could think, and I could really look at the questions and say, how can I show myself and show my knowledge and show my skills off in the best way possible? And, some of the best essays I have ever written throughout my 3 years at university happened during those exams. Like, there was one specific essay that I wrote for an urban geography paper. And like, to this day, I think that might have been my best essay. Like, personally, I think that was my best essay ever. I'm getting so excited just thinking about it all. Personally, I think that was my best essay that I've ever written in the 3 years at university. And it happened in an exam period. And it happened because I could actually sit and I could think and I could plan and I could dissect that question, and I could just be free to show myself off and I had the freedom and I had the flexibility and I had the space to show myself off. And it really, that 24-hour exam period really worked for me. For a lot of my friends who were taking the same course and sitting the same exams, for a lot of my friends, it did not work for them at all. They didn't like it. So that's what I'm saying. Like, the same format of exams, forcing the same format of exams onto everyone is not going to work for everyone. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. Some people are going to thrive. Some people are going to fail, not because any of us are bad students, just because the method of assessment is not conducive, or it favors certain skills over others, right? I feel that because this was an open book exam, and because this was an open book exam, and it was longer, it really required, I think it was an exam that really favored people who came into the exam prepared with well-organized notes and a solid game plan for how they were going to tackle the 24-hour period, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think we should get rid of standardized assessment, which is really radical, or maybe not. Getting rid of standardized assessment in the sense of not getting rid of exams totally, but giving students the opportunity and the flexibility and empowering them to take charge of their own education, and letting them choose the methods of assessment that work best for them. The right combination and the right time. Then that begs the question of, how do we make a fair assessment? Like, how do we compare between two different candidates? And I really, it's a you need to just have that context with you. Like, employers and higher education institutions just need to be provided with the context. Like, okay, this student got an A, this student got an A and they chose to sit all of their subjects as end of year exams. This student got an A and they chose to sit their exams over 2 separate sessions. This student got an A and they chose to do all coursework. This student got an A and they chose to do a combination of exams and coursework. And I don't, no method of assessment is better than other methods of assessment, but some methods of assessment are more conducive to letting individuals, no method of assessment is better in general, but certain methods of assessment are better depending on the individual, right? It's a very specific and individualistic thing. And I think continuing to prioritize exams as the primary means by which we categorize or rank or differentiate between students, continuing to prioritize exams. I think it's prioritizing people who can game the system, people who can memorize, and people who can afford to do well. And it unnecessarily penalizes everyone who is unable to tick all those 3 boxes, right? And exams, and if you don't believe me, like, gaming the system, most exams or most exam syllabi, don't change drastically year on year. So if you have enough past papers with you and you look through them and you look at the questions, there's only, within geography, it's a huge topic, but geography at Cambridge, okay, there's only specific research specialisms that the department has. And so you can and within those specialisms, there's only, so many general topics that were taught. So, okay, you can kind of figure out, okay, these are the main things that will likely come up. It's not a perfect science, but you can, to some extent, game the system. And I've already talked about, what was the other two things I mentioned? I've already talked about the affordability thing and the memorization thing. I mean, exams are, it's a lot about understanding the stuff you've learned and about applying the stuff that you understand. But there is a good chunk of knowledge that you need to memorize, which I think is another reason why I was able to do quite well on my exam essays in my final year, because it was an open book exam. And so I didn't have to remember all of these references and remember who said what. I could go to my notes and just look. And the exams were testing a very, very different set of skills, right? So because of that, because my exams were sort of removing the memorization part, the more priority was given to your actual skills at being able to write an essay. And I think that my essay writing skills are pretty decent, and I did pretty decently in my exams, so I don't think that exams should, I feel that exams reward people who, or some of the people who get rewarded with high grades in their exams are just being rewarded for memorizing, being able to assess or discern patterns in past papers, and, come from a pretty privileged background. And, do we necessarily want to reward those people? I'm sure that, there are a lot of people who get rewarded in exams with high marks because they revised a lot and they put a lot of work in. But that's not what everyone does, So it's a system that, because it's so, because these grades you carry with you for the rest of your life, and it's used to, it forms an integral part of getting into higher education and later getting into jobs, depending on the line of work you choose to go to, because it's such, because they stay with you. I think we need to have a serious think about how we get those grades and what those grades represent and what we are actually testing in order to generate those grades, and what sort of systems of oppression or injustice are we reinforcing by continuing to rely on exams and exam grades as a means of differentiating between people. I don't have answers. I'm not an expert, like I said, but I think that these are questions that need to be asked. So it's been a bit of a dark episode, and I'm sorry about that. Not all of them will be this depressing. If you want something to cheer you up, I do recommend checking out that product review guy on YouTube. His name is Dan. He's a cool guy, I think. Just watch a couple of the episodes. It's endearingly wholesome, as I said. And so that's all we have time for today, folks. I hope that you've enjoyed yourself, or that you feel like you've learned something, or I've provoked your thoughts. If you've got a topic suggestion or any comments, questions, or concerns, why don't you send an email over to occasionallyinsightfulpodcast@gmail.com. That is occasionallyinsightfulpodcast@gmail.com, occasionally spelt with 2 C's, 1 S, and 2 L's. Why don't you also follow me on Twitter while you're at it, at pod_insightful. Why don't you, hit that subscribe button, maybe leave a comment, give us a like, ring that bell. And with that, I thank you all so much for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everyone.